First, Racism is a Student Issue, Black Experiences on Campus panel.
People still talking?
It's working. Okay.
Okay.
Hello. Hi. Welcome to the first Racism is a Student Issue, Black Experience on Campus panel. Firstly, I would like to recognize that this panel is taking place on unceded and unsurrendered Mi'kmaq territory. I think it's important to recognize that the struggle of Black people has been and should always be alongside the Indigenous people of this land, and as we discuss our continued resistance, we do so in solidarity with the Mi'kmaq people. To introduce myself, my name is Amina Bawaji, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. I'm a computer science and international development studies student here at Dalhousie. I'm the VP of the Muslim Student Association and the treasurer of the Black United Student Association. I'm also the vice president, academic and external of the Dalhousie Student Union, making me the first female Muslim executive and the first Black executive of the Dalhousie Student Union.
Wow.
So these panels will be the first time that the Dalhousie Student Union is holding space to discuss and challenge anti-Blackness on campus. This series is about mapping out the current experiences of Black folks on campus and creating space for more understanding, collaboration, and resistance. I hope these conversations can also help to disrupt the narrative that currently excludes the contributions of Black folks on campus, especially here at the DSU. To do that, we want to first look back at the past and our histories to see how we got here, from the founding of Dalhousie University to the creation of the TYP program to the resurrection of the Black United Student Association and all of the pieces of resistance in between. So we have some amazing panelists with us today. We have Dr. Afua Cooper, who is the James Robinson Johnston Chair in Black Canadian Studies. And Nzingha Millar, who is has a BA in International Development and is currently studying journalism at King's. And I'll allow you to both introduce yourself. Elle Jones will be joining us shortly, and as you probably all know, Elle Jones is a community activist, teacher, and former Poet Laureate. So Elle is coming back from Truro, but she will be joining us. So for that reason, we're going to be asking our questions tonight, one panelist at a time, but I encourage other panelists to chime in whenever they want to, as well as the audience, and hopefully we can have a lively discussion. Do you have the questions? Do you have the questions with you? So my first question. As the 200th anniversary of Dalhousie University is approaching, Dalhousie is looking at who shaped their history. What does that history mean to you? How do you see Black people included or excluded from that history? Afua?
So thank you very much, Amina and DSU, for inviting me to be a part of the panel and to address the audience. How do we see Black people being included in the celebrations?
Or in the history of Dalhousie?
Okay, thank you. So Dalhousie University was founded in 1818. Class didn't actually begin until around the 1840s. The university almost never happened because of funding issues. In any event, I mean, it's the university is going ahead with 200 years of existence. It was not a university that was founded to include people of African heritage. The founder of this school, the Earl Dalhousie, had for himself and for the community that he was associated with, had this vision of Dalhousie University as an ecumenical space. And that was, at that time, kind of radical thinking. because academies were supported by particular institutions, particular denominations, I should say. So St. Mary's University for Catholics, Acadia for Baptists, St. Vex for Catholics, so on and so forth. You didn't just come up and start a school of higher learning without backing from a religious, a denomination, because religion was intertwined with education at that time. So for the Earl Dalhousie to say, I want to open a school that's open to all, you don't have to be Presbyterian, which, you know, that's the religious community he came from. You don't have to be Baptist. Everybody and anybody is welcome here. But of course, anybody and everybody meant white men, even if they were from diverse denominations. It meant white men. People of color were not welcome here. People of African heritage in particular, for the longest while. Though as we are looking now at the history of the institution, we see that in 1863, there were several persons, men, male, who were at Dalhousie University, for whom it was stated in terms of their origin that they came from the BWI, the British West Indies. That does not necessarily mean they were black or colored. The BWI had a lot of white people, and planters would often send their sons to places like Dalhousie or Queen's University or the University of Edinburgh or whatever. But we do know that in 1876, not 1876, I should know this, I'm the GRJ chair, because James Robinson Johnston was called to the Nova Scotia bar in 1900 as a lawyer. So in 1898, he matriculated with his bachelor's. So he entered Dalhousie University at the age of 16 in 1896. So he's clearly an African person. We know that. We know he's the first African Nova Scotian to graduate from this institution. But we also know that Henry Sylvester Williams, a black man who came from Trinidad, the island of Trinidad, to study law at this institution. And he and James R. Johnston must have met. It's obvious that they would have met each other. But Henry Sylvester Williams did not stay. Apparently, he was beaten up in the law library by some white students. He found it very difficult to study at Dalhousie, and he eventually left and went to England to complete his law degree and stayed in the UK and became the founder of Pan-Africanism. I always said, what would have happened if Henry Sylvester Williams had stayed in Nova Scotia? But he went on to England and had this brilliant career as a lawyer, as an activist. So these are two early people we know who were here. They were at an institution that was not meant for them. Dalhousie University was a shining white city on the hill. We didn't have a visible presence of African people on this campus until around the 1940s, after the Second World War, when people started coming from other parts of Canada, Ontario in particular, and again from the British West Indies. These are the folks that we have coming here. Maybe later on I'll talk about Lord Dalhousie's idea, the idea he had about black people, or what he thought about black people. So when he founded this institution, again, he didn't have black people in mind. In fact, at the time when the institution was founded, the Earl was governor of the province. He was the governor of the province. At that time, in 1816 to 1818, you had the influx of people who are called the black refugees. These are African people who had fought on the side of the British during the War of 1812 in the United States on the East Coast, in the Chesapeake region. They had fought for the British. The war ended. The British had promised them transportation to other parts of the empire, and the British did transport 2,000 to Nova Scotia at the same time that Lord Dalhousie came, right? So he and the so-called refugees arrived at the same time. He did not want those people in the province and tried very hard to get them out of the province. He even offered to write letters on their behalf to their former slave masters in the American South to take them back, saying these are good black people, they ran away from you, but as governor, I recommend them, take them back, enslave them again, because we just don't want them in Nova Scotia. It is true, you can read the letter, it's on the website of the Nova Scotia Archives. So that's the answer to that question.
So for this question, I'm wondering if you can tell us about your history at Dal. What was your first impression of Dalhousie University, and what was your perception of Black organizing on campus, and has that changed?
Okay, so I came to Dalhousie in 2011 as the Johnston chair. So I came, you know, to take up a chair that was already established. So that was great. The Johnston chair is in Black Canadian Studies. So the mandate was to teach Black Canadian Studies, to pursue knowledge mobilization on Black Canadian Studies, which is fantastic, because oftentimes when we think about Black Studies, we think about American Black Studies. We often don't think that Canada has any kind of Black Studies, right? Every time you talk about Black Studies, people kind of default to American issues. So it's nice to have a chair that's named for Canada, to look at the experiences of Black peoples, plural, in this land space of Canada. When I got here, I faced several challenges. A very basic one being that I didn't have an office. So I came from Ontario and I arrived and I was ready to rock and roll, and I didn't have an office. So I said to the people, okay, look, when you guys are ready, I'll come back. So I went back to Ontario for a month, and I came back and I still didn't have an office. And the dean of my faculty, Fass, over there, he wrote some letters and made some phone calls, and by the end of the day, I had an office. So that goes to show the kind of, people will say it's an oversight, people are saying, oh, you know, it's whatever. I mean, for me, it just shows the kind of low priority that was accorded to Black stuff, right? Black stuff isn't important. You can have the chair walking around campus like a nomad. So that was very, very off-putting. And there were other issues like administrative support for the chair, funding for support, whether it's curricular support or admin support. Those are some of the challenges I face. I still don't have enough admin support. I have 8 hours a week, 8 to 10 hours a week admin support. And as chair, I have a lot of responsibilities, or maybe I should say I've taken on a lot of responsibilities, because I'm an activist scholar. I don't just read books. I love reading books, though. But I'm an activist scholar, and I look whether or not these issues fall under my mandate. It doesn't matter to me as a person, as an African person. It's important for me. So one of the things I did when I came, in order to have a greater voice, because there is strength in union, or the motto of the Haitian people, what's on the Haitian flag, union is our strength. So I said, okay, I know we do have a critical mass of Black people on campus as faculty. I know we have a critical mass of Black faculty. There isn't, tons of us, but at the same time, when I did my investigation and talked to people, in maybe I should say not every, but in almost every faculty at Dalhousie, there is an African person. Law, medicine, computers, arts and sciences, you name it. And I think this is important, because there are schools that maybe have only 2 Black people teaching there, 2 in 2,000 people. So I think Dalhousie having a critical mass of Black scholars and Black teachers was important. And out of this, we founded the Dalhousie Black Faculty Association. But then we also thought there are people who are not faculty, people who are librarians, people who are secretaries, people who do admin work, janitors, et cetera, who are part of the working force at Dalhousie. So the organization, which is very active, is called Dalhousie Black Faculty and Staff Caucus. And we have been very successful in our short time of existence. Do you want me to go on?
Yeah, if you want to, or I can ask you the next question.
Okay.
So what is the history of Black student and faculty organizing at Dal? So I think that's a great segue.
Mm-hmm.
And how has that history been passed on, and how has it influenced the organizers of today?
Okay, so thank you. So Nzingha may wish to speak about the student organizing section. As faculty, we have done work with Dalhousie Black Student Associations, the various student associations, but faculty, so for example, tomorrow is a flag raising day at Dalhousie. Black History Month kicks off today, February 1st, and tomorrow we're having a flag raising day up at the Quad, and that's an initiative that came from Dalhousie Black Faculty and Staff Collective. We said we want the Pan-African flag raised at Dalhousie University to recognize the African presence at Dalhousie University. We began conversation with the administration for several months now before the summer break started, and Barbara Hamilton was the one who sourced the flag and so on. And that was our initiative, because the language that comes out of administration is that of diversity and inclusiveness. But as faculty and staff, we often feel that when they talk about diversity and inclusiveness, they're not talking about Black people. Black people is somehow forgotten. And it's infuriating, because you see that language time and time and time again. You hear the language, rather, but nowhere in the discourse on paper you see African people mentioned or Black people mentioned. And some of our activism and our concerns as Black faculty came out of anti-Black racism on campus. I remember working with Nzingha, people like Isaac Seni and so on, when 2 incidents occurred at the grad house. 2 anti-Black incidents occurred at the grad house in which students were traumatized, like really traumatized. And we took that to administration, and nothing happened. Nice words were spoken. We were told that come the September, this would have been April 2014, come September 2014, as students came in, new students, and at their orientation there would be workshops about diversity and racism and so on. That never happened. Never happened. And Isaac Seni and myself had several meetings with the office, the Harassment and Equity and Human Rights Office, and that came to naught. So the message that we got was that Black people were not important. Issues that affected students and faculty were not important. So our activism as Black faculty came out of some of these real concerns, some of these real anti-Black racism that was happening at Dalhousie campus. For example, I have here an article on the graffiti, the racist graffiti that covered the entire 4th floor of the Killam Library in the spring of 2015. Well, the university did cover it up. They did paint the room or the rooms. Security came and put the yellow ribbon around it. The Dalhousie police, Halifax police was called. They listed it as a hate crime. But we wanted to see real action in terms of workshops and discussions on campus about the graffiti that was just so awful. It never happened. So I'm asking people to come out to the flag raising tomorrow at noon at the Quad.
I think Katie had a question, and if anyone in the audience has a question, feel free to raise your hand, and I can take a speakers list.
Hi, I'm Katie, and I'm currently the Board of Governors rep for the student union. And it's interesting that you brought that up, that diversity and inclusion is kind of an empty word, but they're buzzwords right now. And it's really, really, really heartbreaking to hear that all of those situations happen. And I personally had no idea that those hate crimes existed. And so, do you think the university needs to take a stronger stance against these hate crimes on campus instead of hiding behind like their language of we're working towards diversity and inclusion?
Well, absolutely, the university needs to take a stronger stand. The incident at Grad House was a major issue. In fact, there were 2 incidents at Grad House. I know at that time the VP for Student Services spoke to the manager at Grad House, and the manager at Grad House said, well, the girl who made the offense, she only has 1 more week left to work there because she's a student, and come end of April, that's it for her. Her contract ends. But then after that, another incident happened at Grad House with a different woman. So these are structural issues. For me, the university has to show that it cares about the Black people on campus and not just say it in rhetoric, but in terms of concrete action. I would, now we have a course being taught on African Nova Scotian history. Last semester I taught a course on African Canadian studies, and this one we have one specific to Nova Scotia. I think that's fantastic because African Nova Scotians have been so marginalized as a community in Canada, in Nova Scotia, in Halifax, and also at Dalhousie University campus. But we have students and faculty now, and it's not just now. I mean, people who were students here in the 90s and 70s, if you meet, some of them are still in Halifax, they'll talk about the activism that they were part of in those times. So nothing will happen unless there's a push. That's my opinion. And the push has to come from Black people themselves and other people of conscience.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Was there any other questions from the audience? So speaking about the course, and Dr. Saini, who is the current head of the TYP program, if you could tell us what led to the creation of the transition year program, and how has that changed the Black experience at Dalhousie, and are there any other services or programs that have had a similar effect?
Okay, so the TYP Transitional Year Program was founded in 1972 by Rocky Jones, who has since passed away, and James Walker, who is currently a professor at University of Waterloo in Ontario. And that came out of activism, that came out of some of, the work, the grassroots work that Black people were doing in Halifax and in Nova Scotia and across Canada. The work that the Black United Front was doing, which spoke to, part of the reason that the TYP was founded, it's a bridging, it provides a bridging year for people who, maybe even if they finish high school, their marks weren't strong enough for university. So they do that bridging year, it's supported by the university, and then they enter the regular university after successfully completing that TYP year. So it came out of Black community activism. Rocky Jones, and you can read about this, Rocky's autobiography is now published, when he toured Nova Scotia speaking to people, he said, look, there's also another marginalized community, which is the Mi'kmaq community. So the TYP should be for these 2 groups. And, I take off my hat to him, and I think because he had relations with the Mi'kmaq community, he was an astute political activist, but his vision and that of James Walker was all encompassing. And for me, this is one of the traits I find in Black revolutionary people, is that you think of your community, which is, there's a phrase in Jamaica, it says you learn to dance a yard before you learn to dance abroad. Basically, it means you have to look after your family first before you can look after other people. But in the Black revolutionary tradition, you see these things happening simultaneously. We are hurt, and so are other people. So in order to heal the world, we heal ourselves, we heal our family, but we make sure other peoples are healed. And so the TYP came out of that consciousness. So every day I applaud people like Rocky Joe and James Walker for their vision. And yeah, we must, it's gonna be 50 years almost now of TYP. And TYP has produced all kinds of great people. They're in Nova Scotia, they're all over the world. But you also have the IBNM program, the Indigenous Black and Mi'kmaq program at the law school. And then there's the BSAC, Black Student Advising, and my chair, I guess, could be rolled into that. So it is not, we're not only saying, look, the university must do this, must do that. The university has done a lot, but we're saying that the university can do more.
Thank you. So how do you feel the things that we've discussed this evening have laid the groundwork for present and future organizing?
Well, in terms of laying the groundwork and the fruits of laying the groundwork, I talked about the flag raising that's happening tomorrow. But I also did pioneer the minor, the Black Canadian and African Diaspora minor that was rolled out in September last year, 2016. That was one of my initiatives as Johnston chair. It was the first minor, and it still blows my mind that it's 2016 and it's the first minor Black Canadian Studies minor in Canada. And it's a minor, it's not a major. I'm thinking, how could this happen in 2015? We should have had Black Studies program for a long time in all over Canada. But as it turns out, when we did the research, there were only like 5 courses taught across Canada that had anything to do with Black Canada, right? So I think the minor that I launched in FAS came out of the groundwork that was laid. And there are several other initiatives too that happened that were realized.
So those are all the questions that I had for Afua. I'm wondering if the audience has any questions.
Oh, so maybe I could talk about the other initiative that came, and this is important because as Black faculty, we wrote to Dr. Florizon, the president of the university, and I'm just gonna quote briefly. We believe that this is a moment when Dalhousie can take the national lead in a number of areas regarding inclusion and equity in the academy, as explicitly declared in the 100 Days of Listening final report. So Dr. Florizon, when he arrived, he said he's gonna take 100 years to listen to everybody on campus, to the various constituencies on campus, which he did. And so as Black faculty, we proposed a number of initiatives that we thought that the university could act upon. As you may recall, there was a dentistry scandal. The Backhouse report came out of that, and the Backhouse report focused on misogyny. Then there was the Belong report. Then Doctors Kevin Hewitt and Amy Bombay did another report on student retention and the issues of Black and Indigenous students at Dalhousie University. The Black experience has been and continues to be shaped by the collective experiences of colonialism, slavery, segregation, and structural inequality. While the Belong report does acknowledge that Dalhousie is embedded in this, and I quote, broader social context, unquote, it does not explicitly articulate how Dalhousie is directly implicated in creating and perpetuating the historical disadvantage and marginalization of black communities. So we made several recommendations to this president, that a black faculty advisory council be established that directly advises the president. And this is the second one I want to talk about. Number 2, establish a scholarly panel with a mandate to investigate and report back on Lord Dalhousie's legacy vis-a-vis the black community and Dalhousie University's historical link to slavery. And that panel was established. I'm the chair of that panel. And it, next year is the 200th anniversary. So I talked about at the beginning of my talk, Lord Dalhousie not wanting Africans to be in Nova Scotia. And that's part of his legacy, really. We are looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's a 7-person panel, and I just came back from the UK where myself and a researcher, Jelana Lewis, did work at the Kew, at the National Archives in London, England, and also at the Scottish Records Office in Edinburgh. I visited the University of Edinburgh, where Lord Dalhousie was a student. At that time, he was George Ramsay. He hadn't taken on the earldom yet. And I also visited Dalhousie Castle, which is now a hotel. It's 10 miles from Edinburgh, just to see the start. And just quickly, when you look at around our campus here, you see that griffin, which is kind of like a black eagle. Well, that's a Ramsay family crest. And Lord Dalhousie imported that wholesale, and it's inscribed in the walls and panels on this campus. And also the motto, ora e labora, pray and work. That's his family motto. That's the Ramsay's family motto. The Ramsays, an ancient Scottish clan. So going there and seeing, it was like, sometimes I felt I was at Dalhousie University because things felt so familiar. But the Lord did not want black people here. He said, these people are slaves by habit as well as education, no longer live under the dread of the lash. Their idea of freedom is idleness, and they are therefore quite capable of industry. And then he embarked on a program to deport these 2,000 people, or maybe transport from Nova Scotia to various places, and did manage to send or to get rid of 95 of them who went to Trinidad. But the majority of the refugees stayed. They said, no, thank you. We're going to stay here. We're not going back to our old masters. And part of the investigation is to look at the family, the Ramsay's family links to colonialism and slavery. We don't know, there's no record that shows that the Ramsay family or Lord Dalhousie himself was a slave owner. There's nothing that shows that, whether in Nova Scotia or whenever. He also became Governor General, so he would have gone at that time, think Quebec or Montreal. So there's no history of that we found in his family, but we know the Ramsay men were servants of the crown. They were good imperial servants. So after Lord Dalhousie left Canada, he went to India and was the head of the British Army in India. And then his son, the 10th Earl Dalhousie, became Governor General of India. So there is, when we talk about colonialism, yes, the Ramsay family promoted and spread colonialism throughout the British Empire. We also discovered that several governors of Dalhousie University in the 1840s and 1830s received compensation money from slavery. When Britain abolished slavery in 1833, and then there was what they call an apprenticeship period up to 1838, they decided they were going to compensate the slaveholders for the loss of their property. The enslaved people themselves did not get 1 cent. But Britain compensated the slaveholders to the tune of 20 million pounds, which is a lot of money. One Scottish historian that I spoke to when I was in Scotland said, in today's money, that would be about 400 million pounds. That would be the equivalent today. And believe it or not, the governor, he was trustee at Dalhousie, Almond, after whom Almond Street is named, received compensation money from 2 slave plantations in Jamaica. The slaves, they went per slave. So this slave is worth, I don't know, 100 pounds, 200 pounds, 40 pounds, whatever. And Almond received about 14,000 pounds in compensation money, governor of Dalhousie. There are other links that can be made with this specific institution to slavery itself. But that's just to give you an idea of some of what we have discovered so far.
Mm-hmm. What will come from this investigation? Like, what action do you hope will come following?
Okay, so it is Dalhousie University's link to slavery and race, more specifically. And you know, the whole idea that the Earl arrived in Nova Scotia at the same time that the refugees arrived, I find that really interesting. It's like, in my mind, they both met at the harbor down in Halifax. One was coming to be governor, and the other was coming to, you know, fleeing from slavery and trying to establish themselves. So the issue of race is crucial. What do we hope? We do hope, one, to highlight that history. We do, secondly, to say, to point to the structural inequalities that have existed since day one for Black people in this province and in this country. What we want to have specific outcomes. Some of the outcomes that we are looking at, for one, we'd like to have an exhibit, whether here or wherever. There are many places we can have the exhibit. We will be writing a report, by the way. What are some of the things in terms of outcomes? We want to launch a lecture series. That will speak to this issue of race and slavery vis-a-vis Dalhousie University. And so the exhibit, lecture series, a report. We will have public engagement with the community, with the specific Dalhousie community and with the community at large. Those are some of the outcomes we are hoping to achieve.
Does anyone else have questions for Afua? Okay, looks like we're moving on to Nzingha. Do you want to introduce yourself and talk about how you come to this panel and this work?
Yeah, certainly. Good night, everybody, or good evening. Nice to see you all out here. I feel like I'm kind of far away from everybody, but that's okay. I can see all your faces just the same. So I started my journey here at Dalhousie, and really I'm a King student, but as you can see, we share campuses, so I'm very much a part of Dalhousie as well. I was very fortunate to receive the Dr. Carrie Best Scholarship from King's University, which is given to a student of African Nova Scotian descent in honor of Dr. Carrie Best, who was a pioneering journalist in this province and had 2 newspapers that served the issues faced by Black Nova Scotians and Black communities. So I was really came in sort of on a legacy of that, and I wanted to make sure that I kept up that legacy and was accountable for the privilege that was given to me to be here and to represent in my own way the struggles that were being faced by African Nova Scotian students. So I have become involved with a number of things on campus. My background, as Amina pointed out, I got my BA in International Development and graduated last year. I, as an IDS student, I'm an arts student. I met a lot of people that did know some of the history and such of Black Nova Scotians or Black Canadians and maybe Black people in general, but not specifically Black Nova Scotians. And I think it was really important as well what was brought up by Dr. Cooper about, I'll get into that later, a little bit about the reparations that Laura Dalhousie was paid, but I'll just let Amina get on to the first question.
Okay. So as the 200th anniversary of Dalhousie University is approaching, Dalhousie is looking at who shaped their history. What does that history mean to you? How do you see Black people included or excluded from that history?
Mm-hmm. Well, first I want to thank Dr. Cooper for giving us such a really rich historical background of this institution, as well as the province. And that's why it's so important to have a researcher in the James Robinson Johnston chair position here at the school. And so she talked a lot about Dalhousie and the Earl of Dalhousie and his legacy in terms of starting this institution and how it was shaped. She really covered that completely, but I'll just add one point that I do know about the Earl of Dalhousie as well, was that he had in addition to being governor of Nova Scotia, he was commander-in-chief of the British Indian Army. So that was, that's generally the supreme commander of the British Army and the British Raj. So during the time that Britain was expanding the British East Indies Company, he was military chief. So he was involved in a number of military engagements, which completely wiped out and killed many people in the Indian subcontinent. He was praised for those military achievements and was part of how he gained such prestige here in Nova Scotia. Again, just another thing to add to the record of understanding who are the people that we pay homage to in our institutions and in our society. And we can name so many more that have had similar histories of oppression and genocide, such as Cornwallis, such as other notable politicians and notable people in Nova Scotian history. But as far as who has shaped Dalhousie as an institution, I want to point to a few people that are in a little bit more recent history. And one was mentioned already, which is the late Dr. Burnley Rocky Jones, who was a seminal activist, a Black Panther, and brought that to Nova Scotia. He is a Nova Scotian, born in Truro, grew up in Truro. And he did start the transition year program, and we'll get into that when we get to that question, as well as being involved in the Indigenous Black and Mi'kmaq program at the law school here. But I also wanted to add to that list Dr. Wanda Thomas Bernard, who is now Senator Dr. Wanda Thomas Bernard. And she has worked for a long time in the social work department here at Dalhousie, and was a major influencer in bringing and recruiting African Nova Scotians into that program, especially as the fact that in our communities we deal disproportionately with the social work system because of the deficits in our communities, and that without representation in those professional positions, we were not being served adequately. So she was very important in being involved with that in the Maritime School of Social Work. Also, again, was mentioned Dr. Isaac Saini, who has been a fixture on this campus since probably the 90s, and has been a long-serving staff person, activist on this campus and in the wider community, and has taught in the TUI pre-program for a very long time. And I'll also add, and who's sitting in this audience, Dr. Barb Hamilton Hinch. And she is in the Faculty of Health and Human Performance, and has also brought a lot of African Nova Scotian students into that program to be able to hopefully bring that knowledge set into the programs, but also carry it back into our community. Yes, I think that as well, I should mention you, since you're here sitting with us. But as you know, as we can already tell, the work that Dr. Cooper has done. So I think that it's really important to recognize these people and to remember their legacy and understand what they did and how things worked, and what didn't work, so that we can take that forward.
Yeah, so speaking about your history, can you tell us what was your first impression of Dalhousie University? What was your perception of Black organizing on campus, and has that changed?
Well, as a student, I grew up here in Halifax, and I went to high school at Citadel High, which is like the largest, I believe, in the urban or HRM. So I wasn't really going very far. I just was crossing the street basically from over there by Citadel Hill. So I had a group of people with me, a group of friends that I identified with that did come to university here, but a lot of students, Black students I had gone to school with, did not make it to the university track. And to me, that was it was not something I really had expected to happen, but it did nonetheless. And it was a little bit saddening to me. But that's why it's so important why we have the transition year program, for a number of reasons why their students in our communities are missing the mark. It could be a number of challenges, economic, sociological, we can name so many. But when I arrived on campus, I found, even though I was a King student, all of my classes were on Dalhousie campus, and I was in large classes. So of course, it was difficult for any student who's transitioning from high school. But what I found was a major difference for me was relationships, not so much with other students, but with professors, and how important it is to build those relationships. Of course, there's a huge onus on the student to do that, but there's also an onus on professors as well, I believe, if we believe in a good educational system. I found it easier for a lot of the non-racialized students to endear themselves to professors, because perhaps they had similar ways of thinking about things, similar experiences, that they just found that connection a lot easier to make than personally I did. And that's why it was so important for me to meet Black faculty and staff that did give me that tap on the shoulder to say, here, come under my wing. And without that, I would not be able to sit on this panel today and to be able to speak about the issues that I'm speaking about. Did you ask about Black organizing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I immediately got involved, and another tap on the shoulder I received was from Ms. Oluronke Taiwo, who is the advisor at the Black Student Advising Center, which has been in existence on campus since about the 1990s. It's an office that was developed to be able to be a place for Black students to convene, a place of safety, a place where programs could be developed, where they could get feedback from Black students, as well as build relationships between the other services that were available on campus, and connecting and allowing Black students to access those. So it was about trying to directly reach Black students to be able to participate fully in all parts of university life. And so that was very important to me. It's where I met most of my friends. It's where I felt like I belonged. It was where I kind of grew in terms of my confidence and my voice. So that was a really important organization. But as far as the others that I knew that existed on campus, there were a number of organizations by Black students, but they were sort of disparate in terms of that. They were cultural groups, such as international students from Africa had their own group. International students from the Caribbean had their own group. Well, in fact, Black Nova Scotians did not have their own group, but people wanted to look for, something to call home when they came here, and I can understand international students doing that. I did join the Caribbean Society, which was, to me, another great way to express myself and to connect with half of my heritage, which is Caribbean. But there was a lack of connection between those groups and a lack of connection especially on issues that we were collectively facing. We did have parties and events that we would all go to, but when it came to the important things about our experiences on campus, there was a lack of a solid connected effort. So I think that was the main thing that I noticed.
Again, just a reminder, if there are any questions in the audience, feel free.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned building relationships with professors or instructors.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering what you would hope an instructor would do to reach out and to make those connections, especially in live classes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's definitely a problem, I think, for a lot of students, and especially if you're not outgoing. I'm a person that okay, I'm sitting up here, I can talk to you, but if I go one-on-one to you, it's a little bit harder. But for me to make the first approach, once you come up to me, I'm chat. But I have to think about myself 5 years ago as well, and I think what's important is for professors to recognize when someone is having challenges. I know these are things that we talk about in the public school system, but they're not really considered at all in university education, because we believe that all of a sudden okay, you just graduated high school, you're an adult now, you know how to handle yourself, which is not true. And that's why a lot of people advocate to going to a small school. But when you see that someone is facing barriers or challenges in terms of being able to, this might not be my own personal experience, but things I've witnessed other people experience, to be able to express themselves fully, especially when you have dissenting opinions because of your own cultural background, etc., that those things are listened to, that differences of opinion are nurtured. There was a student that I had spoken to who was in an economics class. She had decided to write her paper on reparations, which is why I was interested in your comment about the fact that Lord Dalhousie had received reparations. And the professor had completely shot her idea down and actually mocked it in front of the class, saying that it's ridiculous or something like that. White people were slaves too in other parts of history. And so those sort of comments and those sort of things make it difficult, especially if you've had one bad experience. It doesn't even have to be with each professor. If you've had one bad experience like that, it makes it difficult for you to want to go and approach your professors, and sit with them in their office hours, talk with them, when you feel like you're not safe to be able to express yourself. So I think that those sorts of things need to be taken seriously for changes to be made. Mm-hmm.
Was that a hand? Yeah?
Yeah, we're taking them seriously, full on agree.
Mm-hmm.
I'm with the Dalhousie Student Advocacy Service, and this year we expanded our mandate to deal with code of conduct issues, discrimination, sexual harassment, all the things.
Mm-hmm.
But when these things happen, we're having trouble having people come and report to us to
Yeah.
bring these
Yeah.
things towards
Yeah.
us.
Right.
We understand that there's a lack of trust to our institution still, and we're trying to build that trust.
Right.
What tips do you think we could use
Right.
to kind of
Mm-hmm.
connect those groups together?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, for sure. And we were talking about what had happened when we had brought forth complaints about the grad house, and that was to the equity board. But in terms of tips in terms of, I think that it would be great to think that a lot of students or the majority of students know that you guys exist, but I feel like that they might not know.
Could I say something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I would also, you have to look at where students are coming from too. I think it's, students have to learn political organizing. We're not dealing with the generation of the 60s or even the 90s, right? So many students are reluctant, and it's not just students, it's, I guess, a lot of human beings, right? It's like, okay, I will take this little bit of oppression. It has not killed me. I will take it. I don't want to go report it up to the equity office because I'm from St. Kitts, I'm here on a student visa, and who knows? And you might say to people, look, nothing's going to happen. You're paying 3 times what domestic students are paying. You have a right to be heard. You're a human being. You must have your humanity affirmed. But many people will still stand back because of the fear factor. No. So the fear factor is one. The whole issue about political organizing is another. We are not taught political organizing. You know, if you look at the civil rights movement, for example, Rosa Parks and those people didn't just run up and down on the street and did what they did. It was very methodical. It was very systemic. They, you know, they went to a civil rights school in Tennessee that taught them how to do practice civil disobedience. When they went in those churches in Selma, Alabama, and elsewhere, and they were trained. They were taught. When those students went out on the street or sat at the lunch counter, it wasn't random. So we have a digital generation, a cyberspace generation that, because black people have been so down-pressed for so many centuries, many people, they said, look, we'll do the party, no problem. We're not making any waves, we'll go to the party. But it's another thing when you have to take that step to report against whatever it is, you know, in the case that we're talking about, racism.
I agree. I think that there's, and I think that like a lot of students face issues when dealing with administration in general, and it can be very, it can be something that's very frightening.
Yeah.
To have to, you feel like you're going up to like explain your case to people, but I really appreciate the work that, you know, student advocacy and stuff is doing, because it's to try to bridge that gap between just the equity offices or speaking to a dean, etc. Because that can be something that if you haven't had experience in doing that, or able to express yourself in the way that maybe someone who is more articulate could, or is more outgoing can, then it's very difficult. But I think that what Dr. Cooper mentioned could be something to look into in terms of, like, how can we train students to be able to advocate for themselves, to feel comfortable doing that. So maybe like sessions, you know, like how to recognize, you know, when you are facing discrimination. Some people actually might be like, in the Black student community here, we have a number of people coming from the Caribbean, coming from African countries where they actually haven't dealt with acts of discrimination before. And because when they come here, they might be experiencing it but not able to recognize it. And that doesn't do us any good either, because it's still happening, and it's still, and those people perpetrating those acts are still thinking that it's okay. So if that student hasn't had the experience to recognize, you know, maybe that what that professor said was not right. You know what I mean? It could be said to someone else in the future. So if we could try to collaborate in some way to be able to teach students more about how to organize themselves, more about how to approach authority, then I think that would be good.
I also want to say too, it wasn't that Lord Dalhousie who received reparation.
Oh, okay.
It was these gentlemen. I'll just read out. They were on the board of governors, or he was.
Oh, okay.
Mather Biles Allman, and his brother William Bruce Allman, and a brother-in-law, James William Johnston, from from the Annapolis Valley. And this would have been the late 1830s.
Okay.
So they received slavery compensation money.
I want to just go back to your point about building consciousness and put a shameless plug out there. On March 18th, we are hosting a racial justice symposium. It will be a day-long symposium closed to racialized students, and it is to build capacity and to build that, build the resistance, I guess. And there will be a keynote that will be open to everyone. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I encourage you all to attend or share. Yeah. So then,
Yeah, it is critical. I think it's critical that people are trained. You know, I for the past year, I have been a support for a student, for a graduate student, and I accompany the student to meetings and with deans and so on. And I remember one meeting we went to, this particular administrator kept saying to him, can you say that again? I can't understand you. You have a very thick accent. Can you say that over and over? And you could see the student, like he was just being deflated. And then I stepped in and I said something to the administrator. And for a year, it's still ongoing. It's coming to some kind of conclusion right now. And this is an international student from a country in Africa. And all our dealings have been with upper level administrators, and it has not been good. And so I'm thinking, if this person is PhD, this person has been through the system, and he's talking to upper administrators, and it's like this, I can just imagine an undergrad student who doesn't have, the experience. So I think you guys need to connect, and so more training can happen, because we all need training in how to be assertive.
For sure.
Nzingha, can you speak more to how the history of organizing has been passed on and how it has influenced the organizing of today?
For sure. Yeah, one thing I did want to mention, and I started getting into this when I talked about the organization of the Black Student Advising Center, and we did talk about TYP and IBM. So again, just to reiterate, the Transition Year Program was established in the 1970s because of the cultural shift and that takes place for Black and Mi'kmaq students, especially coming from segregated communities. At that time, we have to remember that only 10 years prior, elementary schools were actually unofficially but still segregated in the province, elementary and some secondary as well. And so that as well in indigenous communities, you had people that were coming from reserve communities, and for both among Black and indigenous communities, a lot of people who are from rural areas as well coming to the city, and had to deal with an array of changes and an array of new challenges when it came to entering the university institution. So this was very important. And as well, it provides both financial and academic support. So the financial support is very important as well, addressing the fact that we have huge income disparities in terms of the wider community and Black communities. And that one-on-one support from instructors that become mentors throughout any degree program the student takes on is very important as well, to keep people on track and to have someone that understands your needs and understands your specific position as a Black or racialized person on campus. And this is very similar to the IBM program. So again, IBM program came out of the Donald Marshall Inquiry, and offers a lot of those same benefits, especially as we look at the fact that law school has been such an insular part of any university campus, hierarchical, as well as extremely class exclusive, etc. So again, those things are very important. But I wanted to mention an organization which is now in the process of students are trying to resurrect this organization, was the Black United Students Association. And so when I mentioned earlier that when I arrived on campus, there were different cultural groups, or what could you call them, societies, such as the Caribbean Student Society and the African Student Society, that they put on events and, you know, offered traditional food and cultural shows, but there was not really a group that was focused on political issues, racial issues, organizing and bringing the very culturally diverse fabric of our of Black people together in one space. And so I think that no matter where students are from, no matter what their accent sounds like, Black students were facing the same issues on campus. So that is why they wanted to resurrect, and we are in the process of resurrecting, the Black United Students Association, which originally came to Dalhousie in the 1990s. It was really somewhat of a product of an earlier organization called the Cultural Awareness Youth Group, which did organizing and work amongst youth to be culturally aware, Black Nova Scotian youth to be culturally aware and organize, and especially understanding their Black history, understanding their worth, and understanding their possibilities. So those kids that had gone through that program, a lot of them ended up going to university and came together to start this organization, the Black United Students Association. So that's what's being carried out now in the future. We recognize the fact that we lost something that we had. Part of that is, I think, because of the position of where we are now in society, that we are. My opinion is that, first of all, I think that there is less of a presence of unity among some of the Black students, because we have made progress in terms of becoming more connected to other communities and other students from different backgrounds. But at the same time, there's a back edge to that, where we've lost some of our solidarity and ability to come together. So yes, it's really important that we carry this out in the future. And it's hard to get people to really come together and sit down in one place. Like, we have a lot of empty seats here tonight. The weather was a little bit bad, but it's hard to get people to come to a meeting place that regularly takes place, to talk through issues, to be able to disagree on things, come to collective conclusions. These are all issues of organizing that are different than when you perhaps like throw an event and people come out. So right now we're in the process of realizing, how do we do this and take this into to 2017 and the times that we're in, where most people are active through social media and find that that's enough to be politically active, and not actually doing anything in person on the ground where they are in the spaces that they inhabit. So it's challenging, but there are also a lot of, I believe that there are so many students with things to offer. There are allies with things to offer, and that we have to really kind of dig our heels in and get started.
Was that a hand raven?
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you all. and Dalhousie, like, you and I think I'm probably really off on the dates, but early 1900s for that particular organization. I just wonder if there was any discussion held with Dal before that association was put in Lace Bay, or vice versa. Like, if
You mean held with Dalhousie University
yeah, like
in
I just
1900?
wonder- Yeah, I'm just kind of
Okay.
curious to know if there's any documentation that he was reaching out here to Dal to say, because I think at that point already you had one student here at Dal in the law program by the time the association was in Lace Bay. So I just
Yeah.
wonder if there's any connection between those two, and if there's any information available maybe in a museum in Cape Breton.
Okay. Not to my knowledge, when Henry Sylvester Williams was here, that was around 1902. I think he left 1902 and went to England. And the UNIA organizing in Cape Breton began around in the 1920s and 30s. They were pretty strong, pretty active in Nova Scotia, Cape Breton in particular. So when Isaac Saney, who is not here, not in the province tonight, but he and some of his colleagues used to write for this, or founded this newspaper called Shung Paikin. You remember that paper? I think it's now online. It's no longer active, but they wrote several issues on the UNIA in Glace Bay and Cape Breton as a whole. So there's work done by Shung Paikin on UNIA organizing. At the end of September last year, Marcus Garvey's son, Dr. Julius Garvey, was actually here at Dalhousie and spoke over at the Ondaatje Hall. And he had toured Cape Breton and also went to the hall in Glace Bay, which is still a hall, still a Garvey Hall. By the way, there were about 11 Garvey Halls in Nova Scotia. I mean, the Glace Bay and Cape Breton as a whole was very, very strong, very active. But there were other centers in Nova Scotia and Halifax here, lots of Garvey organizing, and throughout Canada, actually. I mean, Marcus Garvey himself, when he was deported from the United States in 1927, came to Canada, made Canada, the Canadian provinces, the center of Garveyism and UNIA. There were many, many conventions that were held in Nova Scotia and in Ontario. And we often think, someone asked me, well, where do I think, which province had the most Garvey halls? And I would say, oh, Ontario. And it was actually Alberta, believe it or not. There was a Garvey hall in Vancouver, British Columbia, very early. So there's been lots of work done. Well, more needs to be done, but a great deal has been done on Garvey organizing. It's interesting, as I said, that Henry Sylvester Williams was at Dalhousie University at the beginning of the 20th century, and then went on to England and became, this major figure in the Pan-African world. So yeah, you're welcome.
No, it's okay. You're welcome.
I'm gonna have to go. What time is it?
At 6:30. Yeah, Elle, we have a number of questions if you want to answer them for us.
Sure. Yeah, sorry, everybody. I was in Nova Institute. I left at 4:30, and the highways, there was about 4 accidents, so it took about 2 hours to get here. So I apologize.
Yeah,
I tried to leave
wanna
early,
say
but
something.
the weather's just been unbearable, so my apologies. Sorry, Amina.
That's okay.
Yeah, I just want to say too, because I have to leave, but I want to say the Black Faculty and Staff Caucus, we stand with the victims of the shooting of the mosque in Quebec. We are outraged by it. We still want, talking about administration on Dalhousie. We still want a statement to be issued by this university, as whenever we've seen several tragedies across North America occurred, and this university has made statements in support of the families. So our caucus, we have issued a public statement. We have sent it to the media. We have issued a PSA, and it's all over, social media. The Universities Canada also has issued statement, and the Canadian Association of University Teachers have issued statement with regards to the Donald Trump ban, because that's also playing havoc with people's lives. We know people have died in custody. For example, a lady who was diabetic couldn't get her diabetic medication, and she died in custody. And hundreds and hundreds of academics have been impacted, and international students. So beginning of Black History Month, a tragedy has occurred in Canada, and we stand with the families of those people, and we condemn Islamophobia and all forms of xenophobia.
Thank you.
And Afua will be
I'll be back.
at another event happening here at 8 p.m. Called Hijab Day. So talking about some of these issues and Islamophobia on campus and in our communities. So Al Jones, the first question that we asked everyone was, as the 200th anniversary of Dalhousie University is approaching, Dalhousie is looking at who shaped their history. What does that history mean to you, and how do you see Black people included or excluded from that history?
Yeah, thank you, Amina. And again, I apologize. I feel like I just jumped into this panel, and now it's really awkward. I guess I'll take a bit of a different tack on that in terms of having just come from the prison, where we're trying to set up programs so the women can get credit. So not just doing like workshop things, but trying to get credit, and the sort of barriers that you're witnessing. And I do think that ties in historically in terms of thinking about who education has historically served and what these institutions have historically done. So the humanistic view of education is that it's universal, that it belongs to all people. And we come here and we get this humanistic, universal education that trains us to be better citizens. But the colonial reality of that is it's always only been open and accessible to a very small percentage of people, who then, by virtue of having this education that's not accessible to people, get to label themselves better humans, more educated, more compassionate, more deserving of the wealth of society, right? So in terms of that colonial education, I think it's very relevant to think about, who cannot be here and who has to struggle for these kind of programs. So going into a prison like Nova, where, the woman came up to me, I had gone there to do poetry, and they're like saying to me, we're done our GEDs, and I'm here for another 5 years, and what am I supposed to do? And I can take a community college course, but it's $800, and I don't have any family, so how am I supposed to pay for that? And that's realities of people. And then trying to work with institutions, which we're doing, and I have to give, props to some of the institutions I'm in, where we're fighting to waive the fees, under the understanding that we are learning from the women when we go in, and that all of this criminology discipline, all this sociology discipline, all the things that we do, that we then take that knowledge and claim ourselves as experts on prison, or experts on the justice system, it only comes because of the welcoming that the women or the men inside or the people inside give us into their lives, yet then we bar them from accessing the same education that, we're allowed to stroll in because we're a PhD researcher, blah, 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 researching this. But then, the women can't pay money because they don't have families. So I think we should be very mindful of that. I believe heavily in education. I'm pro-education, pro-knowledge, but the university doesn't have the only monopoly on our education. It's a beautiful tool often, it empowers us. I work in the classroom. I think there's a lot of beautiful things that happen in our classrooms that challenge us and bring us together. But those classrooms, don't only exist here and have to be existing in our communities. And we have to fight the idea that knowledge only exclusively belongs to universities, and that a degree is the only measure of this, and that the barriers to that, which involve papers and money and being able to perform in the right ways to come in this space, and not having a mental illness when you come, and being able to attend class every day, and all of these things that go into deciding who has the right kind of body and the right kind of personality. This is what a colonial institution does, right? So I guess that's my answer. Next.
So this is more of a personal question. What was your first impression of Dalhousie University? And what was your perception of Black organizing on campus, and how has that changed?
I don't know if Barb's still here or she to leave. Barb was sort of the person that jumped me into like the Black Student Advising Center. She was Barb Hamilton Hinch. Dr. Barb Hamilton Hinch was the advisor when I first came here. And she like ran barefoot across campus to like grab me and be like, "You're Black, right? So like, why aren't you in BSAC? Like, you're a grad student. What are you doing?" You know. So she very much at that time had created a culture where you had a responsibility towards other Black students. So that was my experience in terms of the Black culture on campus, which was Barb like forcibly dragging me into BSAC and, you know, like basically demanding that you mentor, which was wonderful. I don't know, I came as a grad student, so I didn't experience undergrad, which is, I guess, good and bad. Good in the sense of you're slightly more empowered as a grad student in terms of like your own knowledge, but bad in terms of it's very disconnected from the community. So part of being a grad student is that you parachute into a campus, your culture and family and relationship that you have becomes within campus, because those are the only people you know, and you're not introduced to a wider community. You often you live within, you know, the region. When you come, people tell you get an apartment in the South End, right? And for a lot of grad students, you never move outside of that, particularly if you're coming for a master's or something. So there is this bubble that is a very racialized bubble that, you know, you're not with other Black people, so there's no one to say to you, you should come to North Preston for Sunday dinner, or, you know, you need to come down and see people. So that, if you don't have somebody that will meet you and guide you and take you there, for a lot of Black students, it's very, very, very alienating. You're not with your own community, and you have no way, you feel, to get in touch with the home community and the kind of relationships that we need, because Black people are welcoming, but we are an Indigenous culture in that sense of who do you know, who's you're in, like what's your relationship, what is your commitment, what responsibilities do you stand on, and that stuff takes work. It's not just let me stroll in and like post up in your house, right? Like you have to know somebody, because that's what a relationship and a commitment and accountability to the community is. So I definitely went through that. And yeah, I mean, in terms of just certainly the space of Dalhousie as, again, a colonized space that was very separate from the spaces that have now become the most valuable spaces for me, whether that's the spaces I work with people in prison, whether that's community spaces, the learning that you do outside. And then there's a lot of difficulties in transversing those spaces. So, I mean, the physical difficulty of like, shit, I'm driving from the prison and it's snowing and I have to get back to Dal, but also the psychological difficulties, even in terms of the language I learn here. How do I write things when I'm writing and I'm trying to write fast and I'm writing overnight that people that need to read it will understand? But I've been taught a language that people in my community don't necessarily understand, not because they're not intelligent, but because we use a code language in universities and we have a series of code words to talk about concepts that are very hard to break down in your own head. You know, how do I finish a dissertation under the demands of an institution that's based on the work I do in my communities, but none of that work is valued or seen as something worth spending time on, but is the only thing that keeps me alive, right? So those are very difficult spaces to negotiate, to move between community and university, or, you know, activist and scholar or whatever, because the university likes to keep those separate. So that's this sort of personal geography as well. I'm talking really long. Okay, shut me up and go to the next one.
How has the history of organizing Black students or faculty been passed on, and how has it influenced the organizing of today?
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned Bard Hamilton Hinch, and the BSAC came directly out of organizing in the 90s when students here, BUSA and stuff like that, were extremely organized and proactive about needing spaces. So, you know, they were meeting down at tables, you know, in the cafeteria kind of thing, and recognized the need for a dedicated space. It's very hard for Black people to access our history, sometimes deliberately in institutions. I mean, for example, Nzingha was at King's. I wasn't at King's at the same time as you, I don't think. I think we just missed each other. So, you know, if I'm like, that was a 3-year term that I did at King's, then Nzingha comes for 4 or 5 years, and we don't cross over. So what way do I have of, say, passing down or mentoring her or talking to her? And that's a lot of deliberate structure. Like, tenure professors are here a long time, but everybody else is in and out, whether that's sessional staff, grad students. And to a certain extent, I think that's like a deliberate structure, because it deliberately prevents a kind of building outside the university with continuity. So I think it can be very hard for us to pass on our institutional knowledge, especially when many of our professors can't get tenure, or, you know, when our grad students can't finish their dissertations or theses, or can't pay their fees and are getting removed. When we just as, say, women of color have so many other stressful issues in our lives that end up with us being removed from these spaces or not being able to hack it. I teach at SMU, and the last person who was Black that taught in the department ended up with a poster of him, posted in the school, not allowed to come on campus because he experienced so much racism that he experienced some kind of breakdown, which they then used to label him as violent, right? So I don't have access to that history. And that would be true on this campus as well. There's untold numbers of casualties in our academic history that we simply don't have access to, and that are able to then force us to reorganize all the time, because we don't have necessarily the means of communicating with each other. So there's a long, long history here, obviously, particularly in my familiarity with people like Isaac Saney, who were here in the 90s, Barb Hamilton, she's around and still doing that organizing, but also, again, the transitory nature of things like grad school, the psychological, psychic, emotional difficulties of grad school that make it very difficult for us to relate to each other, to speak with each other, sometimes the conflicts we have with each other because of the conflicts that are going on with racism and white supremacy we deal with, all those things inhibit us.
So speaking of Isaac, can you talk a little bit about what led to the creation of the transition year program, and how has that changed the Black experience at Dell? And I know you mentioned BSAC, but are there other services or programs that have a similar effect?
Yeah, and I recommend reading Rocky Burnley-Jones's autobiography that just came out this fall from Fernwood, which covers the chapters, cover also the creation of TYP. And what's sort of interesting about that chapter as well is, I'm not sure, and I think Isaac would concur with this, I don't know if that would get done today. When you look at what was sort of allowed in that program, which was very necessary, decolonial type education. So they sort of just people just kind of came in and they casually were educating people, but in ways that were very African, right? And I don't mean casually as in not rigorous. I mean casually as in let's hold circles and discuss mass readings together, and this is what we're doing in terms of raising our consciousness. And of course, you see as these programs develop in whatever institution, the institution more and more wants to shape those to what's already present in the institution. I think that's a constant struggle for Black programs to maintain the original goals. So, and again, this is not a knock on TYP or Isaac or anything, but I think what you see, having, for example, taught at NSCC in a Black program that no longer exists, is, the goal of the program was to reach the people who most needed education. So those people were people coming out of prison, mothers who, were single mothers that are in their 50s and wanted to come back. And then gradually you would see policies being put in place that made them unable to access the education, but the people who already had the tools able to access the education. So what they wanted is students that could come in, sit in class all day, easily get A's, had the literacy, and then we can graduate them. They didn't want to work with the guy getting out of prison who was so traumatized he could only sit in the classroom for 20 minutes and then had to go play basketball. They didn't want to work with that guy, even though that's the person that we need the education programs for. So I think often when we're doing programs as part of institutions, it's a constant battle to do the things that need to be done for the institution to accept, but also do what we need to do in communities to make sure our education is successful, right, and is accessible to the people we need. So I know that that's been a sort of constant battle with TYP, and we cannot speak about diversity on campus without speaking about the importance of maintaining, and I would hope expanding, TYP and the access to that, because access doesn't look like, we talk a lot about who's in the classroom admin, but it starts at the level of who can even see themselves present in this space. What was the second part of that? I mentioned BSAC.
Yeah, other services or programs that have had a similar effect.
I think obviously student organizing and things. So Amina being on council has changed a lot of people's vision of what student governance looks like, which has historically been very white and often historically been a breeding ground for conservative party people, right? So having Amina there is going to change that. That's an important thing in terms of the role that we take in governance. So maybe not official programs, but a lot of those sort of unofficial meetings. In BSAC, we used to have, in my day, we used to do reading, we'd have discussion group or reading group and just get together and argue about interracial relationships or I don't know, we just have cultural discussions, or we'd pick a short reading and do stuff. And that was a lot of building. It was informal, but it meant that you were building with somebody from Nigeria and somebody from Jamaica and somebody from here. And then we could work out a lot of the different perceptions that people had of each other. And I think that was really key in creating community. I would also challenge Dalhousie, this goes back to the point about prisons, for example, is that a lot of the programs universities do are on a kind of white savior model, that their vision of community programming is we go in and sail in and help those poor people, but we're not going to bring them here, right? So I think I would challenge the institution to be much more, we need much more programs that are like, why don't we have a prison program where people can get out of prison and come here and go for free because we recognize the social good of people having access to education? Those models are available. Why don't we have them? Grinnell College has it. We could do that. Do we have programs where people can access credits without necessarily doing a full degree? Can we offer certificates so that you can get a certain amount of credit and get a certificate towards counseling or certificate towards this? I think there's a lot of different programs that could be more accessible to Black people if we thought outside the model of 4-year degree. This still kind of like entrance level. I think universities have a much more work to do in terms of moving out of this space and moving into communities, educating within communities, validating other classrooms. Why can't gardening be part of a university program and be something that we offer credit for if you're meeting outcomes? And why can't people in universities learn from people in communities and those people that are doing that teaching in Indigenous communities be given credits or PhDs as a result, right? Like we talk about indigenizing the university or whatever, and we mean coming here and getting our knowledge. We don't mean us going out and paying people to take us into Indigenous communities and teach us and be experts, right? So that still needs to be reversed.
Mm-hmm. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention was...
I know, it's like I'm giving an essay because it's just me.
No way. I had just forgot to mention the Dalhousie Imhotep Legacy Program, yes, which is also very important. It creates a link between the university and the community to support Black Nova Scotian students being involved in STEM-related fields. Dr. Kevin Hewitt was important in organizing this, and many others as well, in terms of understanding this concept called backward integration. So if we want to see more Black doctors, Black physiotherapists, nurses, people in those fields, because we need representation. I don't think that we have to explain why at this point, that we have to then expose people from a very young age to the possibility of being involved in those fields, especially because in our education system from the public school level, we see our students being streamlined into certain domains, educational domains, if they are being pushed towards higher education at all. Generally, we see more students being pushed towards, for instance, like sociological fields, obviously because we need them there, but that does not mean that we don't need our Black students in STEM fields as well. So that was a really important organization, and is still going on today.
I want to open the floor to any questions from the audience for either Elle or Nzingha.
Crickets. I will comment on something that Elle said, which was about the fact of how we missed each other in terms of the way that we lined up in terms of coming here, and the fact that we don't have instructors being put into tenure track positions, especially Black instructors. And what's so important to that is that we need to create, and this is what Elle was saying, an institutional memory in terms of understanding the history and having record of what these Black experiences we're talking about have been on campus from such a very early time. And we are so fortunate to have people like Dr. Afua Cooper and the James Robinson Johnston Chair as sort of a fixed position here at this institution. And because just by virtue of who she is, as she calls herself an activist scholar, has taken record of these incidents here on campus and the history of this university, and has taken action on it. But we don't, I think that it's important to also bring this outside of Dalhousie as well, that we don't have that at a lot of institutions, not even down the street at St. Mary's University or the Mount necessarily have all the things that we have at Dalhousie, or vice versa. They may have things that we don't have. So I think that it's really important to recognize how that really makes such a huge difference, or else things are just lost in translation. They're lost in history, and we're constantly having to start ourselves over, reinvent ourselves, not in a good way, but in a way where we've lost touch with the work that has already been done, and we're then starting so many steps behind.
Yeah, and I think I should have flagged for myself as well that we always need to recognize the role of the social class in organizing. So when we talk about, what organizations are available, we have to look at the working class communities that have organizations that have traditionally been the ones driving social justice. And again, this goes back to the kind of bubbling of the university, where those who have, and I include myself in this, those who have more education, more privilege, often, lighter skin shades that are allowed in, that are able to present ourselves in the ways that are acceptable and allow us to move through these spaces, despite the racism we suffer here. I think it can also be easy in a university to get very caught up in talking about like how terrible it is for me that I can't get tenure or something, without recognizing that continuum of racism. Like, yes, that's real. Yes, that affects me. Yes, it affects my bottom line. When I'm working 4 courses sessionally, right? That obviously has an effect on me. But compared to the fact that I was just dealing with a sister trying to get out of a max unit, so I do think we can recognize our own experiences. We don't have to, as Black people, always reduce our experiences in light of a greater oppression that someone's happening, but we have to use our experiences of oppression within the university in solidarity with those within our communities, and not prioritize and privilege ourselves as well. And then we become sort of the sole voices and the sole authors of what racism looks like, and it becomes part of a respectability politics of racism is bad because it prevents middle class people from living like white people, rather than, racism is bad because it divides us from each other. It prevents us from participating fully in our lives as human beings, as, full people within our community. It prevents us from loving Blackness in all its forms. It prevents us from respecting knowledge that comes from all different forms, because we're taught to only respect articulate knowledge, or knowledge that has a certain kind of facts that's taught to us, right? And those things become very internalized, and then they put a bar on the way that we organize with our communities and the way we live with our families and live with ourselves and each other, and the kind of knowledge that we learn to value. So I think when we talk about university organizing, we have to ask ourselves, am I organizing with people in the wider community? What social class are the people I'm organizing with? Is everybody I'm organizing with, only, are we speaking in a language that, only we understand? What permissions from the land that I'm on and the communities I'm with have I received in my organizing? Am I just tokenizing other people, or am I truly working in solidarity with them to hear their voices? I mean, these are questions we have to constantly, and again, I'm including myself. I'm not acting like I'm, telling you this. I'm saying these are questions I have to constantly ask myself, and things like prison so-called activism, right? Because I get to leave at the end of the day, and that is a fundamental privilege that if I don't recognize that constantly and what that means, I'm very easily becoming part of the oppressor class, even as I complain about the racism I experience, right? So I think we always have to be mindful of the kinds of solidarities we're building, what that looks like, and constantly reflect on ourselves and our own power, and why do we want a white colonial power for ourselves? Who taught us that that's what we need, and how can we deconstruct that thinking in ourselves as well?
I also, I know this was kind of one of our questions that we were presented with today, was about the curriculum here on campus as well. And so it was mentioned that we've developed and have pushed for a African Canadian Studies minor. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about my experience as a student. When I got here and I wanted to take classes, I was fortunate to be able to take history classes and a lot of classes that exposed me to different cultural ideas because of the virtue of my program. So I'd taken, I got excited seeing African history courses and seeing courses on courses that were placed in places that have had a colonial background. And I was really largely disappointed, especially by the African history courses that I took. None of the courses, from what I know, except for a few that Dr. Cooper was teaching, were taught by people of color, Black people, and there was a very, very obvious disconnect from understanding or being able to teach this material in its full effect, as well as I don't know, I had just been unlucky that I got a professor that a lot of people didn't like. He was arrogant, and he thought he knew everything on the material, and didn't take challenges to that material, even from people that were from that cultural background, which was to me ridiculous. And I believe he had received complaints, but I think that on the other end of that, I had professors, and ironically, I don't know, most of these professors were women, that were a lot less stuck in their own ways and beliefs that they had, that they knew it all. I find, as my experience on campus as well, in terms of the culture of Dalhousie, to be still very largely have a traditional male culture as we define it in our society, and of course that white male patriarchy that seeps into everything from that point. But when I did have a few instructors that really did support me and really did push me when I wanted to push back against certain ideas. And I had a class on children in war, and we were visited by an ex-military personnel. He was an older man that had served in Rwanda during the genocide, and he was teaching us about the stages of genocide and how to recognize when a nation is moving towards this very dangerous point in time. And at the time, Dylan Roof had just shot 9 people in a church in South Carolina. And I was really upset in general because nobody had mentioned anything in any of my classes, and these were people I respected as being people that were fighting for human rights. That's why they were in the international development field, but no instructor, no student had said anything. So I raised the point that that I believe that the United States was somehow on like stage 3 or 4 of genocide watch, and our guest speaker was somehow asserting that it was on stage 1, and he and I debated and sparred over this. Meanwhile, my professor is in the corner, nodding her head when I'm speaking, and she's giving me that, little I hear what you're saying, and came up to me afterwards as well to talk about this. But as we can see now with the Donald Trump campaign that has just completely exposed the truth of that nation, and the truth in our own society as well, and with the current ban for people from Muslim majority nations entering the country, as well as all of the rampant racism, sexism, Islamophobia that has come out of this administration within its first 2 weeks. I would love to have that conversation again with the with the guest speaker that we had, but it's so important, yes, to have people in positions of authority in the classroom that are able to support you, and it's really just not a reality as much for Black and racialized students. And I mentioned before what had happened to a student in an economics classroom. Those are just 2 examples. The examples are just numerous, too many to mention, as well as incidents between students on campus. We didn't really talk much about that. But I think that I'll just close by saying on that point is that it's difficult to tackle these issues because we see Dalhousie as being an institution. We can bring change to this institution by perhaps approaching administration or dealing or inserting certain programs, getting students involved in different initiatives. But I really still see a huge piece of that puzzle as being on individual professors in the classroom, in that intimate space of learning where it's so difficult to actually influence and change the way that interaction happens, because these are individual professors that have autonomy, that have perhaps been in their position for many years and don't want to have to change the way that they do things. So I think that that's something that we have to focus on too. How can we reach instructors and professors directly and make them accountable?
Yeah, are we doing closings? Okay. I think if I'd been on this panel 2 years ago, I'd have probably been like crying, because it would have been extremely traumatic in the number of traumatic experiences I had at Dalhousie. And the reason why I feel like now it's a bit, I'm like, I can talk to you about this, is precisely because at the point where I really had been pushed into, intense, essentially being broken by Dalhousie, it was the people in the prison communities and the people in those communities that picked me up and showed me intense solidarity and love at like every point. When I was on the floor crying, like I didn't get the job, like I don't know what I'm gonna do, I don't know how I'm gonna pay my bills. And they were like, don't worry, girl, like I'll go staple the heads, I'll go staple him, fuck them, you're awesome. It was them that expressed like intense love. And that's what really allowed me to remove myself from valuing myself solely within a space that really made me feel terrible about myself at like every point in my life, like no lie, that it really was a destructive experience. There's good things I took out of it, but overall, the only reason I think why I can really sit on this panel and be like, racism at Dalhousie is manageable, we can talk about it, is because of the communities I found outside that loved me and gave me solidarity and allowed me to be and value myself in new ways. So I encourage everybody experiencing oppression on this campus to, yes, work on this campus, but make sure you find those supports, find those communities outside, find those people who love you regardless and will be in solidarity with you, and give your energy to them, because this place will often tell you that that energy is not as worthwhile as the negative energy you're experiencing here. And I'm not saying don't finish your degree, or I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that don't let that value you. Recognize your degree and knowledge here for what it is, and make sure that when your experiences are here, that you are replenishing yourself out in your communities or with your families or with other people. Or, I don't think you can survive. We can't survive these spaces, or we survive these spaces by overvaluing them and taking on that thing. And do I have time for a quick poem?
Yeah.
I don't want to. I showed up late, and now I'm like taking all the time. I'll do a quick poem. So this is not actually. This is from a person whose bulletin board I have to walk by in my hallway at a certain institution. So he has up this newsletter with an article he wrote about like all the cupcake babies that just complain about rape culture on campus, and talking about how evil and threatening all the Black Lives Matter activists are on these campuses and how they're oppressing white people, and then he has all these representations of like threatening black protesters and the innocent whites that they made cry, and how terrible this is. So I wrote a poem about it. It's called To the White Man Who Posted a Newsletter Outside His Office Denying the Existence of Racism and Rape Culture in Universities. What's good, Professor? Uh-oh, did that sound too black? Are you angry that white men these days are under attack? Do you just want the university to go back to how it was before the women, the POCs, and the gays? It's sort of funny that you're accusing others of being cupcakes crying about safe space when you're having such a defensive reaction to the possibility of a brown face. Or those uppity women who won't stay in their place. Well, I'm sorry that we're taking back the pie where you had your fingers. I suppose that's just my lack of academic rigor that makes me question why old white male professors should feel entitled to their teenage students' figures. And now it's being ruined because those man-hating feminazis are so bitter. I'm sorry, does my melanin trigger you? Maybe you have some kind of inferiority complex that black men are bigger than you. You can be honest about it, that's okay, but it seems like you're twisted into fits of impotent rage, and I gotta say, the fact that you're whining about people imagining microaggressions while literally using your bulletin board to post a microaggression makes you kind of not that smart or brave. And maybe you posted it there to try to fuck up someone like me's day. Good luck. We've already dealt with 100 problems bigger than you before opening our eyes and still went on our way. Or maybe you're imagining you're some kind of freedom fighter while being the typical neckbeard MRA, because I've seen better arguments and logic in my first-year students' essays. But I'm sure you'll continue to believe that it's people like me who aren't making the grade, so hey, I'm your worst nightmare outside your office door right now, and we're here to stay. Are you scared of Ebonics in your hallways? Like one of these days your colleagues will stop saying good morning and start engaging you in complicated handshakes? Guess what? I just warmed up roti in the microwave. Better hurry before the whole break room smells like curry. I just took a shit in the bathroom outside your office and now it smells like jerk. Just kidding, I don't shit at work. Are you concerned that I got my students woke and you can't keep yours awake? And we be on some next level shit while you still struggling to conjugate. Guess what? My office is where more than one black person congregates, and we've got faculty IDs so you can't even call the police to investigate. Does the fact that I just got on stage with this poem about you illustrate exactly why you want us kept behind security gates? Now you can't tell your racist and sexist jokes that babies are just too politically incorrect to take. Now you have to fake interest at the diversity training. Poor special snowflake. Oh no, you lost 1% of your privilege. What a heartbreak. Does that make you quake in your boots? Like every lecture in every class will just be us showing roots with that Toby scene on an endless loop, and women like me will be all up in your shit with that anti-intellectual attitude. Yes, I chew up dudes like you as my breakfast food, keeps my hair kinky and elevates my mood. Shoot, when we're through, departmental meetings will be taken up with discussions of empire and scandal. My bad, is that too much for you to handle? We'll be using all kinds of words and you won't know what they mean. Soon people will be talking in the elevator about cocoa butter instead of sunscreen. Students will be walking around with berets and afros draped in red, black, and green. We don't have to use products for this, it's our natural sheen, and we gon' walk like we belong here because it's our natural scene, and we'll be wearing Black Lives Matter tees and buttons that say fuck the patriarchy, and we'll think things and go places where you've never been. So yeah, you've already been beat. Hell, if it wasn't for tenure, you'd already be obsolete. Thank God for white privilege that keeps you on your feet and allows you to claim that you're just advocating free speech while you can have your little newsletter, because when I speak, they're saying, sister, preach. Because we're representing worlds that are so far out of your reach. And so you're desperately clinging to your bulletin board and maybe the classes that you teach, and it's all eroding out from under you like waves wearing down the beach. So I'll repeat, yo, white male professor, what's good? You had your day already. Now welcome to our hood.
Can we give a round of applause for both of our speakers?
Thank you, Amina. And again, sorry about crashing in late. Thank you, Nzingha.
Thank you.
And I just want to give props to these young ladies that just doing their thing like on campus nonstop.
so
It's
lucky
so
to be
inspiring
able to
just
come
to see these women every day. So thank you.
So just to close, a couple announcements. This is the first panel in a series happening every Wednesday. The next one is a lunchtime discussion, 12 to 1 in the same room. And the following week, it will be another evening, same time, same place. We have little flyers in the back as a reminder. We are also launching our Racism is a Student Issue campaign that is leading up to our Racial Justice Symposium on March 18th. So we have two papers. One says, what does racism feel like on campus? And the other says, how can we combat racism on campus? And these will be featured on our red wall downstairs. So, yeah.
Thank you
all for coming. Please stay and chat.